Bitcoin at its core is not controlled by anyone. There's no Bitcoin company, there's no Bitcoin founder, if you will, that continues to hold the reins. There's no central company or country that has the majority of the mining. It's just basically a code. It is an algorithm. It is an open ledger. It's many things. It's not one thing, it's many things, as you understand. But at its core, it's freedom. Absolute scarcity. No one can print more. I can be part of it, but if I'm not part of it, it's going to run away on me. It's going to be a curve similar to the adoption of the radio, and then the television, and then the car, and the mobile phone. And you can see on all these adoption curves that it kind of goes flat, and then it's just vertical. We just keep printing this money, putting those at the very top so high on the totem pole, and the rest of us so far down that the wealth gap is ridiculous. So this is breaking down trust even further, but we're all looking at, well, is it immigrants? Is it the government? Is it the media? Is it big pharma? Let's bring it down to a layer one solution of hard money. And that hard money, of course, my friend, is Bitcoin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to My Two Sats. My name is CJK. Today, I'm here with a good friend, Adam Stokes. Adam, thanks so much for being with me.
So good to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to see you again. I'll tell you what, there's a lot to talk about today. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin, macro, interest rates, probably a little bit of politics as well. But when I start my show out, I always like my guests to tell their orange pill moment. And I know you personally have multiple orange pills. So how about we go with that original orange pill and then your most recent Bitcoin orange pill?
Oh, great question. It brings back so many warm and fuzzy memories, CJ. Like, to be honest, the first orange pill moment was essentially when I got into mining. The concept of plugging a machine into the wall and magic internet funny money coming out the other end, that's where it started. But of course, there's more to Bitcoin than buy low, sell high. There's more to Bitcoin than money just coming out of the wall, if you will. I think the real turning point was 4 years into my journey after mining for so long, listening to a lot of Andreas Antonopoulos' work, and then realizing, it's much more than buying low and selling high. And once you actually start to understand the decentralized ledger, I think that was a big orange pill for me, and realizing that there is in fact no Bitcoin. That is, it's just a ledger, and everyone can hold the ledger, and everyone can see the movement of the numbers, if you will, on this ledger. Now, even that is quite a deep concept in itself, but there's so many exciting times on my timeline where we see now politics are getting into it. And I'm glad you're going to touch on it, because on my show, we touch on politics, and some people have said, well, you can't talk about politics because you're talking about crypto. And the reality is, CJ, is that they're so deeply intertwined. You actually can't separate the two. People are made up within societies. Societies have politicians. Politicians steer which way the society is going through policy. And that policy links, of course, to money. And money, in my mind, is the layer one foundation to everything in life, whether we like it or not. Whether we're going to church, we need money to support that church and support the people in it. Whether we're playing sport, we need money for that. If we want to give a gift, if we want to have health, wealth, love, and happiness, the layer one to all of it, whether we like it or not, is money. Even if we say, no, we're going to go completely off the grid and just buy a block of land, well, guess what? We still need to do some form of barter, or we still need to pay land taxes to the government. So the layer one to everything, whether we like it or not, is money. Now, that doesn't mean money has to be evil. What it means is that we need a hard, sound, immutable, open, neutral money. And that, of course, my friend, is Bitcoin.
Adam, that is so well said. I threw him right into the fire, guys. Look at him. He's already on a roll without even an introduction. And that's why I love him. I didn't want to waste any of that time. But look, now that you can just tell by the way Adam talks about Bitcoin, you can tell his passion, his understanding, his experience. Adam, go ahead and tell everybody just a little bit about what you do and the great community that you've built.
Yeah, so I love my community. So I've been on YouTube doing crypto for about 8 years I'm up to now. So I started primarily talking about mining, but then I realized, no, in fact, it has to go much bigger. And as we touched on, it goes into politics and macroeconomics. So I guess by trade, I'm an economist, if there is such a thing. That is, I've got degrees in management, economics, masters of business, and languages. And what was interesting about learning money was realizing that it was in fact a language. It's a language where you and I can communicate with one another from the other side of the world or right next to each other. Whenever I travel overseas, even if I don't speak the language of the native tongue of the people in the place that I'm visiting, if I hold up a $20 US bill, People know what I'm saying. We know the language that we're talking there. So in my community, what we talk about is not just Bitcoin or any coin. I'm certainly not a Bitcoin maxi. If you had a gun to my head, I would be a Bitcoin maxi. That would be the number one coin. In my mind, there is Bitcoin and then there is everything else. And within my community, we talk about the power of Bitcoin, but we absolutely explore all of the other coins. So I'm an author. I've written a children's book. I've also written a trading book, and I'm not sure there's many people that would have written a trading book and a children's book. I love my animals on the estate I live on. I've got dogs and cats and chickens. But 28 Pro Trader Tips, The Art of Trading was my first financial book. But I recently released Clucky the Courageous Chicken. And what's interesting, CJ, is that I'm so heavily into crypto, and I'm a big believer in Bitcoin being the layer one to life, if you will, when it comes to money. But a lot of my community are, in fact, encouraging me to write the script or release a meme coin. And I'm kind of conflicted with this because, we talk about what's the value of a meme coin, and well, the value is determined by the market. So in some ways, I'm thinking, well, maybe I should just make a meme coin because it's like making a website and it's a bit of fun. But I wonder, CJ, if it compromises my values because, I mean, let's face it, a meme coin is just a bit of fun where people buy low and hopefully sell high, and then eventually they dump. So I'm conflicted. I'm like, my people, if you will, my community is saying, Adam, you need to make Dino the dog coin or Clucky the chicken coin. And it's like, yeah, I'm not sure if I can, but it could be a little fun project. And ultimately, if the market is screaming for it, why not just to learn, as I did with mining, why not learn how to make a meme coin? Of course, we've done NFTs in the past, and maybe it's just a natural progression that you start to make all components of this space.
It's so interesting, really, that the people themselves, like you said, the market decides and the market creates demand. But the source of that demand is really a thirst for an evolution of the existing system, whether it's a loyalty level system, whether it's just a security, whether it's a community token. It's just interesting to see that there's such a thirst and there's such a marketplace with consistent demand for people looking for new ways to be rewarded for their community and from their community and how to interact with their community. And I think that's really what a lot of this is about. So, me, I am a Bitcoin maxi. Nothing can compete with Bitcoin, and get all the rest of the shit coins away. So keep Clucky in the books and write a new one for Dino to come in there to save the day as well. But don't go with the meme coins. But that's just me. That's my maxi. But I find the demand from the community should not be ignored. And it has to be answered in some way or form. And I think once we get past like the early version where we are in it, remember in the beginning of the internet, we had pets.com, we had the whole internet bubble, and everybody thought everything was going to be successful, and it wasn't. And then here we are just last night on X with 2 billionaires of the world trying to have a conversation with the rest of the mainstream media trying to stop them.
Yes.
So how far we've come from you got to have your domain name to an actual town square where people can interact with each other and exchange ideas, exchange value. So I think the market's close. I think we're trending in the right direction. I think that there's going to be a way that community members, because I have that with Christian investment analysis as well. Community members, we want to interact with each other. We want to trade ideas and reward value and conversation between each other. You see that on Nostr when you can zap for ideas. All of that is interesting to me. And we see it in meme coins right now. Like, you're spot on. The meme coins are where communities are going right now. But in the future, maybe there is some type of Bitcoin derivative, some type of zap setup where community members are going to be able to benefit off of each other's ideas and conversations and comments and likes. And we see the early iterations of that now in Nostr. But I think, the demand that you're speaking of is an important demand from the marketplace that we can't ignore. And the other thing is, it's not trying to be money, right? It's a way to interact with these. It's not competing with Bitcoin. It's not, these people are not asking you to build a new Bitcoin. You all know, you've taught your community how important Bitcoin is. Like you said, it's that layer one foundation. But now that we have that equity-based foundation that we can build fun stuff on top of, and we're not building on top of the sand, we're building on rock, what cool and interesting things can we get into? So I always love when I talk to you because you always give me such a great angle on these things. And most Bitcoin maxis would be super triggered. But for you, I know that you're such a deep thinker that you can see the way that these things are moving. So where do you see community and Bitcoin and that communication layer going in the near future, especially as Bitcoin becomes more and more prevalent in all forms of conversation?
Well, first of all, I thank you for your kind words, and I knew that you, of all people, my friend, would understand my moral conflict with the people screaming, "Make this, basically make this shitcoin." But although I'm not a Bitcoin maxi because I'm an investor and an economist and a crypto enthusiast. But again, I understand the power of Bitcoin, and I understand that the need for Bitcoin as the layer one to pretty much everything. I also agree with you that over time, all of these coins, in my mind, and who really knows, they're all going to zero, but Bitcoin will continue to chug along. But here's the thing, for all of us Bitcoin maxis or closet maxis, if you will, we believe deeply in the free market in the sense that Bitcoin at its core is not controlled by anyone. There's no Bitcoin company, there's no Bitcoin founder, if you will, that continues to hold the reins. There's no central company or country that has the majority of the mining. It's just basically a code. It is an algorithm. It is a open ledger. It's many things. It's not one thing. It's many things, as you understand. But at its core, it's freedom. Bitcoin is a money of peace, while fiat is a money of war. And that's where we started. And where people get angry at Bitcoin, they say, "Well, I thought it was supposed to be this, and I thought it was supposed to be that, and it's too slow." And it's like, Bitcoin's just Bitcoin. It doesn't care what you think it was supposed to be. It is just Bitcoin. It's just free. It's open. It's neutral. It's borderless. And that in itself makes us realize that when it comes to the other coins, we actually have to allow them to be what they are, because the market is people, and people are made up of emotions, and those emotions lead to actions, and those actions lead to a buy or a sell. And you've nailed it before, where you said essentially people understand, particularly in my community, they absolutely understand that when I'm saying go Pepe as an example, I'm not saying Pepe is a better Bitcoin. I'm not saying Pepe is a better Ethereum or a better Doge. I'm just saying Pepe is Pepe. It is what it is. And it, in fact, enables a new paradigm where people can invest into a movement. They can invest into a meme. They can invest into a thought. They can invest into a brand. And we've now got the intelligence along the crypto timeline, well, certainly those who've been in long enough, that they understand that a meme coin is merely just a meme coin that can be monetized. Now, all coins have, when they say a certain meme coin has no utility, all coins have the utility of peer-to-peer transfers. Now, they also have the utility of when we have a storage of value, albeit very volatile. They all still have that utility and value to an extent. When it comes to people choosing to invest in meme coins, it comes in, they hopefully come in low and sell high, but people now understand that it's quite risky. As we move on to, the communication of what's happening with us around the world, as I mentioned, money is a language, and I'm stealing this from Andreas Antonopoulos. So Andreas Antonopoulos, I'd call him the godfather of Bitcoin, if you will. It's a bit sad that he's gone a bit radio silent over the last few months, and I think it's because, well, I don't know, but it seems that he's done his work. He's laid his layer one foundation to the space with the knowledge and the insight and the philosophy into everything Bitcoin. And now he's kind of stepped back from that space. And I hope to see him come back in. But I've got so much deep thinking from Andreas Antonopoulos. And then, of course, we've got going to Jeff Booth and Michael Saylor, and they're all different angles. But I still refer back to Andreas Antonopoulos. Money is a language. And if we understand the parameters of this language, as in a fixed supply, an open and neutral borderless ledger, it changes the way that we as humans interact with each other globally. Because at the moment, let's face it, there is a big trust issue with multiple components of society. There's trust issues with government, there's trust issues with media, and of course, there's trust issues with the banks and money. And all of it, as I mentioned, goes back to the layer one solution. It's money. And that layer one solution is hopefully going to be a hard sound money where we can interact, work with each other, communicate with each other to understand that, you know what, if I'm going to give you a Satoshi, this is one of only so many Satoshis that I'm going to give you. No one's going to print more of it. No one's going to dilute it or debase it. Sure, it could go the other way where people lose it, making it an even more scarce asset. But until we understand that we have one hard, sound, neutral, open, borderless money, the way we interact as a society globally is going to forever be without trust. I don't trust you, you don't trust me, we don't trust them, and they don't trust us. So let's find a money that removes that trust. And that is, of course, the money of Bitcoin, a trustless money. A word that is so odd that when I was doing my economics degree, I don't think I ever heard the word trustless. I didn't even know what it was. But of course, as you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, if you will, and go deeper and deeper into the warren, you start to realize all these new words, such as trustless, actually means the opposite. Trustless, in fact, means complete trust. That I trust this thing so much that I don't even need to worry about the word trust. We are all fighting at the moment to figure out what is money. The US debt clock is at $35 trillion. Australia's hasn't got that much debt, but every nation has unforeseeable amounts of debt. And we just keep printing this money, putting those at the very top so high on the totem pole and the rest of us so far down that the wealth gap is ridiculous. So this is breaking down trust even further, where we're all looking at, well, is it immigrants? Is it the government? Is it the media? Is it big pharma? Let's bring it down to a layer one solution of hard money. And that hard money, of course, my friend, is Bitcoin.
Oh, so well said. And I do have one pushback on you, which is
Please.
I do think because we're in such an early iteration of alternative coins, and Bitcoin isn't understood as that layer one yet, and some of these other things, a lot of the shit coins brand themselves as money. Ether is supposed to be hard money now with its burn rate, all of this stuff. But in reality, I think what it really demonstrates is what you were shifting into there in the end, which is inflation and politics and what's going on there, because people are so forced out the risk curve that you have to go to the level of meme coin to be attached to like a brand, because
Powerful. Yeah.
in other words, like you should be, if you want to be attached to like Nike or General Mills or what, I don't even know like off the top of my head, but a lot of these stocks, they don't sound like brands that mesh with our mindsets, right? Like everybody's like, wait a second, Nike is working kids over in the sweatshops,
Yeah.
and LeBron James isn't really that good of a guy that I really look up to. So why would I want to own a piece of that brand? So it's almost like the brands are so old that you can get a piece of like in traditional markets. And the new generation, whether we like it or not, is connecting to a different type of branding, a different type of community. Whereas before people could own equity in a company and feel like they were stakeholders. But now our generation and younger are so removed from that they'd rather own a Pepe than a share of Nike stock. They'd rather take a chance on Doge or whatever the next Doge is going to be, because there is no existing brand that, number one, they really want to associate with, but then number two, gives them the market the chance to be irreasonable or irrational and grow significant amounts of wealth. Because I'll tell you, nobody's investing in Nike who's 20 years old who's going to be happy by the time they're 35 or 40. That's not going to. But if you bought some Dogecoin before Elon Musk entered Doge, and a lot of people messed around with that for stupid reasons, especially in the earlier days, and you got billions of coins, and now all of a sudden Elon Musk enters the marketplace. There still is no future for Doge. It's still a shitcoin, but look at the value that's gone to it. You can't argue with the value that the market is giving it, because it's a liquid market. You can sell when you want to, 24/7, 365, and you can extract the value from the existing marketplace if you so desire. So the market is telling you something right there. And to me, it's telling me, number one, it doesn't really understand what Bitcoin is. But number two, we're so disenfranchised by the system itself that we'll take meme coins over equities. Do you think that trend is going to accelerate?
Mate, I love working with you because you always get me in deep thought experiments. That's deeper level thinking. And I had so many concurrent thoughts when you were talking there. Isn't it amazing how, as we as humans, we need to belong? So, let's go bring it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got your lower levels, which is basically food, water, shelter. Then as you start to move up the pyramid, if you will, you need to belong to something before reaching the highest level of self-actualization. But the belonging part of that is quite interesting. We need to belong to something, whether it's a family, a church, a sports club, a school, a footy team that we support from the sidelines. You're right. When it comes to investing in these companies, like I've been investing in shares since I was 18. So I've been in traditional stock markets. And what was so disenfranchising about that is that the minimum buy-in was $500. Now, going back many years, even now, $500 is a lot of money for a lot of people. So when you have a minimum buy-in of $500 on the traditional stock exchange, at the time when I first started, this is how old I am, it was a $70 fee in and a $70 fee out. Yeah, insane. Now, of course, those fees have now gone down to about $15 for a minimum $500 buy-in, but that's still ridiculous. Then the next part is I can only do it 9 to 5 or even less, 9 till 4, 5 days a week when the markets are open. And that is just it's such a prehistoric model for this generation. Even for me, I'm at this perfect age, if you will, where I was kind of before internet. I was in the evolution of internet, and now I'm in the internet, if you will. Same with mobile phones. I'm old. This is my confession to you, my young crypto brother. I can remember when there were no mobile phones. I can remember the first mobile phones coming in, and then I can remember mobile phones being part of what we are. And I'm grateful to God, or just the timeline of that I'm in, is that at the moment what I can actually see is I can see the contrast. I can see the contrast of pre-digital and post-digital. What I don't think the older generation, and I'm talking, like the Buffetts and the Mungers, bless him, and maybe even the Jamie Dimons to an extent, I don't think they understand the power of digital. I don't think that we'll go with Peter Schiff as an example. And you mentioned the word value before. Value is such an interesting word because Peter Schiff, as a traditional trader who's big in gold, he says, now we love Peter Schiff because he understands that fiat is toxic and cancer and broken and needs to be stopped. Where we don't agree with Schiff is that he thinks that the answer is gold. Now, I strongly disagree with that because if the answer to gold as a global reserve currency worked, it would be a global reserve currency. The other reason why I don't think gold will ever work because it's not fungible. I can't use it on the internet. I can't use it on the shop. I can't use it in international trade. I have to centralize that gold somewhere, then write a note against it, and then we're back to fiat. You're going to have a double spend. You're going to have people centralizing the gold, and then you realize that and he says, well, just write a digital note against the gold. And then the answer to that is, and I'm sure you understand this, you don't need the gold. What you need is the trust and the scarcity. That's what you really need. You need it to be trusted that no one can print more of this and it's scarce. I trust this and I trust that it's scarce. Gold, we don't know what the supply is. We have to centralize that gold somewhere. Someone then has to write a note against it. It becomes very inefficient. There's no trust involved with it. That is, it's not a trustless money. It's a money we can't trust because we keep seeing it over and over again. So it moves into the power of digital and what is value. When I think it's very intellectually dishonest when someone like Peter Schiff, who is very intelligent and who does understand money, to say that something like Bitcoin that has a market cap of over at the time $1.2 trillion, to say that thing has no value. It's like, what do you mean it has no value? It literally has a market cap of $1.2 trillion or whatever it is at the moment. It moves so quickly, but over $1 trillion. So to say that anything with a market cap of $1 trillion has no value, or to say something that's the most secure payment system in the history of humanity has no value, or to say that a network where people are building upon it, it's been around for 15 years. Institutions are getting into it. Retail investors have built it from the ground up. Nation states are now getting into it. To say that it has no value is so intellectually dishonest or incompetent that I kind of have to actually start pushing that voice away, because it's like, yeah, you're not presenting a sound argument. It's not a sound argument. When it comes into valuing meme coins, again, what is value? Well, value is in fact the free market of what you and I value. I give the example of Louis Vuitton handbags. I despise that stuff. I have absolutely no interest in buying a big branded thing by paying some third party a huge amount of money so I can wear their logo on my body or on my bag. It just doesn't interest me. But here's the thing, that's me. I know lots of people, they love that stuff. And I have to actually respect that that's the free market. The free market says that this group of people really like that brand. The free market says that these silly basketball cards, now, I don't mean to insult anyone who likes basketball cards, but again, I have no interest in that. But that's a multi-million-dollar industry in itself. You've got people who collect coins, people who collect notes, people who collect Pokemon cards and Pogs. So we now move into understanding value in the physical space, but many people don't understand value. I suggest the older value of things in the digital space. Now, the younger generation, and I'll link this to gaming quickly. I'm not a gamer, but I've had friends who are gamer, and I can see when people spend money on skins, as an example. So, they've got a gun in this game, and they want to make this gun, as an example, pink or camouflage. They can buy a skin to make that camouflage unique or make that gun unique. Now, to me, that has no value to me because A, I'm not a gamer, and B, I was just not interested in making a gun in a game with camouflage. But that, again, the free market, many people will pay big money for skins, those skins to make themselves unique in the game. We then move on to NFTs, and NFTs is like, well, didn't that rock the world of so many traditional investors? Because people were paying millions of dollars in some instances for a JPEG. Now, of course, it was a unique JPEG, a unique image. But when people don't understand that the uniqueness of digital, you have this separation. As we move along and the older generation, if you will, moves on, we can be in a position where we've set ourselves up, we've positioned ourselves not for the old investors, but for the new investors. The new generation, as you mentioned, the disenfranchised younger generation who don't want to invest in a sweatshop Nike. They don't want to invest in an Apple company where people are jumping out of buildings to commit suicide after horrendous working conditions. What they'd rather invest in is a real world asset or an NFT or a skin to a game or a meme coin. Now, the older guys, they may hate that. It doesn't matter. They will move on and the money will shift to elsewhere. We are part of the biggest wealth shift in the history of humanity, and I'm excited to be on the right side of it.
Yeah, that was the thing that really stuck out to me was absolute digital scarcity. And I think, right now the regular business model, especially, and I love that you tied it to video games because that's actually happening now in crypto. Some of these games are adding the idea of scarcity into the equation where you instead of before it was like, hey, we'll just sell as many skins as we possibly can, right? Because we can create as many as we want, therefore we'll sell as many as we can. But now they're starting to find out like it's a real business because it's a multi-billion-dollar marketplace. So even though people like you and I would not waste even a fraction of a penny on something that has no value to us, but to others, it has great value because they
Yes.
spend their time and energy there. And we respect them because it's a free market. So that's absolutely a fact. But then where we go to next is these video game companies, and I'm keeping an eye on a few, to be honest with you, because I actually own some plots in Decentraland because of some of that early stuff that went on. Because I'm interested. Like that's interesting to me. Like that movie Ready Player One. Like there can be spaces that people come around and that can deliver value. And as long as you're not, as long as you understand that Bitcoin is money and it's your savings, and then you take a portion of what you want to risk, and you're free to put that where you want. That's what a free market is, and you're going to put it where you put value and put interest, and that's where it was for me at that time, and it kind of still is there. I think digital land and we've heard Saylor call Bitcoin digital real estate, right? He recently said that buying Bitcoin now is like buying Manhattan, right? It's like the Louisiana Purchase because it's so misunderstood right now. It's so early, and it's going to branch out into a lot of concepts, but getting back to what I wanted to say, kind of go into the economics of price discovery, because I want my listeners to kind of understand how this dynamic works. Is these people start figuring out, let's not just sell an unlimited amount of skins, right? Because now we get to the real world commodity cycle. There's a limited supply, and when demand grows against the supply, the price goes up. And if the price goes up, the idea is to find the balance between that supply and demand so that you can maintain the highest price. That's the whole point of the computer game or the business, is to maximize profits. So it turns out that providing an unlimited amount of supply is not actually as the most profitable outcome. What's more profitable is when you have an invested community in the game or in the land or in the realm, whatever you want to call it, and then you have limited supply. And it's so interesting that we saw that concept in that movie Ready Player One, where there were what they call them like Easter eggs, I guess they were called, because no, that was like the main thing. I forget what the heck they're called, but everybody could find items throughout the world, right? So you could be any, you didn't have to be some special level player to find like a really valuable item. You can just be around and you can find an item that you could sell to somebody else who really wanted for a lot of money. But everybody was on an equal and fair level, and there was an unlimited amount of items. But because the amount of items were limited in nature, kind of like if you think of oil, for instance, drawing it back to like macro, like, yeah, there's a lot of oil everywhere. You can buy oil from, there's a whole bunch of different video games. There's a whole bunch of Decentralands. You can go a lot of different places to get your oil, but ultimately there's a finite amount of oil and there's a finite amount of this brand or this community. And now they discover, well, wait a second, absolute digital scarcity. And this is from Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is changing the way businesses think because of absolute digital scarcity. So I'd love to get your thoughts on like, what is this concept of absolute digital scarcity? Why are traditional economists, or whatever we call ourselves, struggling with the concept of absolute finite supply? This seems to be a big gap.
Beautifully framed question. So, and it's funny you should mention Ready Player One, because I only just saw it recently, and I'm like, wow, what a like, it was so much fun. And just to reminisce, where they had that first car race, and there was like dinosaurs coming out of the ground and King Kong chasing the cars, and having done a lot of work in the metaverse, albeit so rudimentary at the moment, it just made me realize, yeah, this is where we're going. You can do anything you want in the metaverse. And I'm a big believer of the future of the metaverse, because I argue that we're already there. You can already see people in role player games. You and I, to a level, are in the metaverse right now because we're on the other side of the world from each other, but we're using the internet as our communication method. Now, of course, we could just put an avatar over ourselves in the future, and then, as you saw in that game, maybe we can have fights or surfing or climbing mountains or do whatever you want, and it's just so liberating. But when we move to the digital scarcity side, my observation is this: I don't think people truly understand physical scarcity. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, I remember this. I remember when I was about 7 or 8 asking my father, "Dad, how much petrol is there?" That's what we call gas for our cars, petroleum. And he goes, "Oh, no, there's enough." And I remember clearly saying as a little boy to my father, "Will there be any petrol left when I can drive?" And even as I look back as an adult now at my childhood self, I'm like, why was I asking that question? That's not really a question that a 6-year-old kid would ask his dad. But I guess it's because something in my mind, in my journey, is that I actually was grasping the concept of scarcity as a little kid, of things running out. And I love driving and I love cars. Even when I was a kid, I loved cars. But I remember my father saying, "Don't worry, there'll be enough fuel." And I said, "But how much is there?" And he goes, "There's more than enough for you and your kids." Now, my father had the mindset of abundance. Now, as I get as an adult, I'm like, well, maybe we were both right. He was right that, yeah, there's enough fuel, and I've got many cars now, and I drive as much as I want, and there's enough fuel for me. But equally, I acknowledge that there's a scarcity of physical oil in the ground, and there's only so much we can actually use, because when we look at everything on the earth, there is in fact only so much of everything. Now, we don't know how much there is. We don't know how much gold there is. I use gold as an example because we've mined about 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools of gold out of the ground. That's what we know that we've got. But even then, we don't know where all of that gold is. And as we understand, I think Indian women are the biggest holders of gold in the world with all their jewelry. We can't audit all the gold in all of the vaults all around the world. There's new technology that we haven't discovered yet that will be able to get to gold that is in the deepest oceans or in the deepest canyons or in the deepest holes in the ground. But we still don't know how much is there. And then we have other gold that's in ground that we know it's there, but we can't mine it because of human-made laws. So we don't know the supply of gold. We actually don't know how scarce it is. But when you step back big picture, we can all say, yeah, there's only so many resources on the earth. We're on this big sphere, or some people will call it a disc. Let's not get into that argument of flat earth versus round earth. But in any case, we're in this block of something floating around space. And there's only so many assets. There's only so much water, there's only so much sand, there's only so much gold, there's only so much oil. But then you go into the digital space, CJK, and people don't get that there's in fact absolute scarcity in something like Bitcoin. The first reason why they don't get it, in my opinion, is because when we go into the digital space, we're so used to being able to press copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. And let's face it, the biggest achievement for Bitcoin, there are many, many things that Bitcoin has pulled off. You know, the decentralized ledger, the halving in itself is just an incredible concept when it comes to the economic rollout of the supply into society. But the biggest hurdle was overcoming that double spend. How do you overcome a double spend that is copying and pasting a digital asset? So I send you a Bitcoin, but I still hold the Bitcoin and we've both got a Bitcoin. Once we overcame that, once Satoshi overcame that, I should not take credit for his incredible work. But once we overcame that, it created a new paradigm for scarcity, because it's in fact the first time in humanity that we had absolute digital scarcity, but a digital scarcity that everyone could see. That is contrasted with gold. We know gold is scarce, but we don't know how scarce. We know oil is scarce, but we don't know how scarce. But when it comes to Bitcoin, we know it's scarce and we know how scarce it is. We know the actual supply. Now, of course, newbies come in and they say, and I love the argument because it's so easy to argue. They say, well, I could just make a new Bitcoin. I said, absolutely, you could make your own Bitcoin. And they said, but then I've got my own Bitcoin. I say, yeah, no, you've got your Bitcoin, but there's only one Bitcoin and the Bitcoin's called Bitcoin. We can see that people have tried it. And you know what? I'm glad they've tried it. Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Black, Bitcoin Diamond, Bitcoin SV. Take your pick. There's been countless Bitcoins, but there's only one Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is called Bitcoin. And everyone who says that they can fork Bitcoin and make their own, I say, yeah, absolutely, go for it, and you will go to zero. They all go to zero. All of them go to zero. Meanwhile, Bitcoin, the only Bitcoin, keeps going up and to the right. Sure, there's pullbacks, but who really cares about that? Everything's going up and down. There's cycles of everything in nature. It's a universal law. When we move on to the other scarce assets, like I'm glad you mentioned Ethereum. Ethereum's so interesting to me, and I think Ethereum has a place in our ecosystem. But what's fascinating to me is when they start saying this is now a hard, scarce asset. And it's like, well, no, not really, because it doesn't have a fixed supply. It can be inflationary and deflationary. Now, of course, when we saw, I think it was a couple back, the upgrades, they said, well, now it's going to constantly go down as a supply. It'll be deflationary. Well, guess what? When the market pulled back and there weren't many transactions on Ethereum, the supply started to go back up. Now, that's not necessarily good or bad, but it just proves our point that it is not infinitely scarce. It is not a hard set supply. It's a fluid supply. Now, that's fine for whatever that ecosystem needs to do, but that's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the hard, scarce digital asset, absolute scarcity. And this supply shock that's about to hit the world. Once people, you and I get it, um, Jeff Booth gets it, Saylor gets it, Andreas gets it, a lot of retail investors get it. I'd suggest a lot of bankers get it. But there's going to be this turning point. There'll be this turning point where the whole world has this aha moment where they're like, absolute scarcity. No one can print more. I can be part of it, but if I'm not part of it, it's going to run away on me. It's going to be a curve similar to the adoption of the radio and then the television and then the TV, and the car and the mobile phone. And you can see on all these adoption curves that it kind of goes flat and then it's just vertical. It just goes straight up as the entire world takes on a mobile phone or uses a light bulb or uses a car. The adoption curve is almost vertical. And we are still not there yet, which is very exciting for you and me, because what that means is that we are positioning ourselves for the aha moment when the whole world realizes this is what Bitcoin is. The second part to this, beyond that scarcity of what Bitcoin is as, well, let's face it, a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account, we're going to start building upon Bitcoin. I look at Bitcoin as the steel and concrete of the digital world. So what can you, when steel and concrete was, if you will, discovered, well, what could you do with it? Well, a lot of things, but we didn't actually know everything we could do with steel and concrete. At first we thought, oh, well, we'll make footpaths. Then you see what the Romans did, building these fabulous structures, even the Greeks to an extent. And then we realized, oh, hang on, we can actually build things within these structures. So we can build buildings, and then we can put offices in the buildings, and the people in the offices and the buildings can start to create stuff. And steel and cement, steel and concrete became the layer one to so many different things that we build on top of it, physically or metaphorically. And I see Bitcoin as the same. You're going to have, first of all, this supply shock of people realizing, hang on, I can't get any more of this. This is an absolutely scarce asset. But more importantly, I actually need this thing to build on top of it. So I don't have shifting sands. I've got a solid foundation where whatever I build on top of it, it's not going to be rug pulled. It's not going to be digitally, physically, or legally rug pulled from underneath me. I can build incredible things on top of this hard, scarce asset.
Mm. What do you think is going to be the catalyst to that aha moment? Is it going to be political? Is it going to be financial? Is it going to be like what I know that's like an impossible question to answer, but I just want to know I know you think about these things on a deeper level, and I really want to know, like, what's the highest probability outcome in your opinion of that
Yeah,
aha trust transferred moment?
it'll be the collapse of the US dollar. That is you're right, I have gone through deep thought experiments on this. It'll be a combination of the collapse of fiat systems around the world combined with war. Those are the two things that will happen in conjunction or one after the other. Fiat will collapse because all fiat always fails. And there's a level of arrogance to say that, no, my fiat will survive because of the color of my flag or the number of warships I have. The reality is all fiat always fails. And once these fiats start to fail, there'll be a mass mass run to the exits. And the exit, the life raft, if you will, is Bitcoin.
Mm. And that brings up a maybe even deeper question, which is once these fiats fail, is there a need for a nation state? Is there a possibility to move beyond the colors of our flags? Do you think that's part of this transfer, or is that kind of a separate movement?
There was a recent documentary released. It wasn't a documentary, it was about a 20 or 30-minute video that basically went over the timeline of Bitcoin from 15 years ago to now. And I thought, okay, well, why is there still 10 minutes of the video? But then the video went forward into the future and said, this is what will happen with the Bitcoin standard, essentially. And what it showed was that, and it was done beautifully, and it really got me into deep thinking. I'm like, okay, we know fiat is a money of war and Bitcoin is a money of peace. But once we actually realize that we have a deflationary money and a scarce money, and all we need to do is invest in energy. And energy is not just for Bitcoin. Artificial intelligence needs energy. That my house, what we're doing right now, energy should be what we're pushing for as a society to let's break this nut. Let's crack this nut to figure out how do we get infinite energy without damaging the environment. And Bitcoin actually plays a big part in this. For all the hate from the normies on Bitcoin where they say it's bad for the environment, no. Bitcoin's good for the environment. It's good for the environment because people are striving to make or capture the most efficient energy, the most renewable energy, to link it to the energy, the scarce hard energy of money. And these are deeply intertwined concepts that take many years to grasp. Even on top of my economics degree, it wasn't until 10 years, if you will, into my Bitcoin journey, I'm like, that's how that links together. So just when and I'm sure you can relate to this, just when you think you know Bitcoin, you have an aha moment that we touched on in the beginning. And then you think, right, now I know Bitcoin. And then a few years later, you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And then a few years later, you have another aha moment. So the future of humanity, if you will, is we have to accept that all humans, irrespective of color or religion or language or gender, at our core, we're kind of greedy and lazy. We want to get all this stuff, and we may not necessarily want to work too hard for it. It's like water, taking the least path of resistance, taking the path of least resistance. You pour water down a hill, it's not going to go up a hill. It's going to flow the easiest way to where it wants to go and where it needs to go. Now, we might get philosophical here and say humans are made up of mostly water, and our energy sort of goes in the same way. What happens in society is you can see that those who get at the top, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, whether you, as in the United States, is a global reserve currency, or Australia, or China, or Russia, it doesn't matter. Once you have the ability to print money, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. When we remove that potential for absolute corruption, we actually go on a new path. We go on a new path of like, how do we actually get back to life? How do we get back to not just trying to get all of these resources for ourselves to stockpile them? Because the most rich in the world, they're never going to be able to spend all of that money. Even if they spend millions and millions of dollars a day, they're still not going to be able to spend it all. So instead of trying to take all of these piles of money and centralize them in themselves, maybe we can go back to, as this documentary was looking at, going back to the basics of life, getting in touch with nature, getting more in touch with the spiritual side of ourselves, getting in touch with creating energy in an efficient way, the arts, music, and more. And instead of fighting each other over, I want this energy and these resources and that money, maybe we can have a symbiotic relationship where we synergize together as a global community and realize that, you know what, we're all people. We all want food, water, shelter. We all want to look after our family and look after our health. And we all want some time on the weekend or during the evening to be in touch with perhaps a God, perhaps with nature, perhaps our family, perhaps our pets, as opposed to what we're doing at the moment, working ourselves into an oblivion, to be taxed to no end, to deal with the brutal and immoral tax of inflation. So those right at the very top can get all the resources and assets for the work of the majority. It actually turns what we've got at the moment on its head. Instead of everyone working to feed those at the top, it kind of flattens the whole thing and says, right, we're all just working to be equal, but not in a communist way, not in a socialist way. When we go back to fairness again, we talk about Bitcoin being fair. It links to the fairness of output. If I do the most amount of work, I should get the most amount of output and the most amount of reward. If I do the least amount of work, and we can see this with miners as an example, they get the least amount of reward. When we've got a hard money such as Bitcoin that translates into humanity, we're actually going to have a much fairer society where those who do the most and deliver the most receive the most, and equally those who do the least and corrupt the most, they are penalized for it. Example, in Bitcoin, if someone tries to do something dodgy on the chain, the rest of the miners will kick them off and they're out of the network. I look forward to a society where we have a fair, hard, sound money that translate into the way we live, of a fair, sound, open community, as opposed to those at the top getting the most and those on the bottom getting the least.
So well said. And I love what you said, that 15 years. It's actually like miraculous if you think about it, because we've just started the digital age and now we have our digital money. We're 15 years in, and what we see is an unbelievable speed and advancement of the technology itself, and of the adoption. And I wonder, just because the system itself, it's going to fight back. It has to, right? They're not just going to move aside. And I wonder, is it Bitcoin able to be integrated into the system? Will the system try to co-opt and integrate it? Or are these two systems diametrically opposed? Where do you stand on that?
Great question. So I link it to the banks. Will we have banks in the future? And will we have governments in the future? Now, some people are anti-government. I think governments play a role. I think it's okay to elect someone to be a leader in a community and ensure that the rules are adhered to. Where governments go too far is that it's too much regulation now. Like it's like we have a boot on our neck for everything we want to do, everything we want to create and innovate. The regulation is so stifling; it's crippling everyone, including governments themselves. We then move into, but that's not to say I don't believe in governments. I think governments serve a good role in keeping us all in check equally if they're working properly, ensuring that we're protected, ensuring that there's decent infrastructure in place. Like I use street lighting. In Anarchy, they talk about everyone pays for everything themselves. And in deep thought experiments, you look at, well, in society, what are some things that we can't really pay every time we use? Police might be an example, but there's an argument that no, you just pay an insurance policy and police will rock up. Judges, hospitals, firefighting, that might be an example where you pay into a system that gives you those services. But when you actually look around your community, think of street lighting. I think street lighting is a good example. If its user pays for everything and I'm walking down the street, do I need an RFID tag that is connected to my body, and street lighting only comes on when I, as a payer of that street light, walks past it and the street light comes on? It's like, now street lighting creates a better bubble, a better bit of security for everyone. And it makes sense that we all pay something into a centralized body and we have infrastructure. The infrastructure is, roads, water, sewage, electrical lines, street lighting, many things that I think as a community, as a civilized and advanced community, we pay into this body and they run and make that happen. Where it goes too far, of course, is where that body goes too big and we're now just a self-licking ice cream where we're paying all of this money into this centralized body so they can, in this example, just lick themselves for the sake of existing. That doesn't work. When we look at banks are the next thing. So banks will, in my mind, not that I agree with it, I think banks will always be around. And it goes back to the free market. You look at ETFs. Why would you invest in an ETF when you could buy the Bitcoin yourself? And the answer to that is because people like using centralized bodies. The free market suggests that people like banks. They may not like them morally, but grandma and maybe some even young people, to an extent, they like it. They don't want the responsibility. I don't want to go on an exchange. I don't want to hold the coin. I don't want the custody. I don't want the headache. It's like literally, and I'm sure you've experienced, they say, here, you take my money and you do it for me. Now, that drives me nuts as a Bitcoin or a crypto investor because people want me to do the work for them. But then I realized, no, that's the free market. Some people they don't want to deal with the money. They don't want to hold it. They don't want to do all the work. So as we move forward, we say, well, will there be banks? And I think there will be banks because they are massive corporations with a lot of power. But equally, people, in fact, want to use banks. But then we go on to, well, what do banks use? And this is where the conflict arises. If banks can fractionally reserve money that they don't have and dilute money in an economy, that creates market failure. That market failure is what we're moving into now with massive inflation and a huge debt clock. If banks could adopt a hard money, so it's still kind of their model with the removal of fractional reserve lending and other dodgy things that they do, they could still use a hard sound money such as Bitcoin and generate legitimate profits through fees, which is, I've got no issue with fees, because if I'm offering you a service and I do that service and I put in labor, then I should be paid for that service, because if I don't, I'm going to go bust and you don't get your service. So that's the free market. Where the clash is this, the clash is, well, what's the money going to be? BRICS is coming up, of course. The US dollar absolutely wants to hold its power. Governments around the world want the ability to print money out of thin air by taking people's value through the dilution of money through inflation and printing fiat to an oblivion. Nations everywhere want to do that, not just America, but Australia, everyone who uses a fiat system. But what's fascinating to me, CJ, is at the moment that you can see a presidential candidate, Trump, saying, well, in fact, maybe we could use this hard asset as part of our reserves. And we've never seen that. Well, with the exception of El Salvador. El Salvador was probably the first mover in that, so fair enough there. But we've certainly never seen it in the United States. We've never seen it from a global reserve stance where they say, hey, we can use this digital asset to back up what we do. And you even see Saylor talking about it, where the US dollar and Bitcoin can work in synergy. Now, these are deep concepts that would have a lot of teething problems along the way and still have the potential, in my mind, for some corruption where it's like, yeah, we'll just print a little bit more of this funny money to be allegedly backed by this hard money. I think there will be a long transition. There'll be a transition from, as we've seen, in 15 years, you're right, it's so quick. We've gone from nothing to this internet funny money to now it's in presidential campaigns, all within 15 years. That's a massively quick timeline. What we're going to see in the next battle is, of course, banks don't want to let go of their power. When you've got the ability to make so much money through the corruption of fiat, it's a drug that you're addicted to and you cannot let go of it. How do you let go of this drug? And hopefully the way they let go of it is through a peaceful revolution, or evolution, I should probably say. What concerns me, though, is that it won't be a peaceful transition. My fear, and I hope my fear is unfounded, that the transition will be one of war. It will be one of collapse. It will be one of famine. It will be one of complete societal breakdown, where there is a turning point where, if you will, the dam breaks and all the corruption behind the dam just spills out, and it washes away the villages in this metaphoric example. And then we rebuild from that with a better dam per se. I cannot see, and maybe I'll get your insight into this. I cannot see a completely smooth, seamless transition from a scarce, correction, an unlimited funny money called fiat to a hard, scarce, sound money like Bitcoin, for the fact that government's addicted to a fiat, and banks and the mega rich are addicted to the benefits that they get from fiat. Your thoughts?
Yes. So beautiful points, and there's a couple of things that went through my head as you were speaking, as usual. The first thing is that I agree with you, and I'm not like an anarchist. I'm actually like a anti-globalist. I think countries would be better off if that's the miracle about Bitcoin for me. Bitcoin can interlink our commodities and our economies in a more efficient way than the traditional system does, so that our production and consumption can better empower all of us, but separately. So I do think that I like the concept of there being nation states and flags, but I do think that we need to come together on an economic level in order to maximize our efficiency of our production and consumption. And Bitcoin is the tool to do that. But then we run into the next thing that you said, which was, are these bankers and the cantillionaires going to just give up their power, give up their ability to print, give up their ability to manipulate? And that is such a great question. And my thought on that is, I like to point to FTX, because FTX is guilty of doing exactly what you said, selling the paper Bitcoin. And when they needed the Bitcoin, even though they had potentially a money laundering operation with the existing administration through Ukraine, and you'd think they would just print the money to keep the operation going, they didn't. And they couldn't get the Bitcoin. They couldn't get their hands on the Bitcoin. And Bitcoin forced the failure. So isn't it an interesting concept that these people, the cantillionaires, they promise you no death and no destruction and peace and safety, while they benefit the most? And it's not a lie, because look what they're doing. If the banks have a problem, bank term funding program. If the economy has a problem, no problem. We'll spend like there's no tomorrow. And of course, they benefit the most, and nothing trickles down because they hold the assets and they're closest to the printer. But nothing bad happens. And then Bitcoin comes along and integrates into the system, hopefully, and it forces bad things to happen, because you can't sometimes, depending on how much Bitcoin you need, there is no amount of money that's going to fix that problem for you, because the market, even though there's millions of coins in circulation, not all of those coins are for sale. And although the market is 24/7, 365 liquid, look at the price volatility we get when Michael Saylor buys, or when we know that there's a big sell-off like Germany, right? So the amount of circulating coins and the amount of liquidity that's in the live marketplace available for trading is much, much smaller than 21 million, or even just the amount of circulating coins. A lot of those coins are off the market. And then what that does is it creates the potential for failure. And that's actually what we need. We need failure. People don't want to come out and say that. They don't. That's what gives these elites the ability to maintain the illusion of trust, because they're not going to let anything bad happen to us. If something bad starts to happen, like the banks start to fail, no problem. They just print the money. If we have COVID and they shut the world down on us, then they just print the money, and they just print the money. And then what happens is you destroy the business cycle. And we are so far along in that process now. There's been no destructive business. The destructive cycle portion of the business cycle is now skipped over with printing. And I'm hoping that Bitcoin can get its way back in there and force that destructive mechanism within the banks, because at some point in time, a bank's going to hold it as a reserve asset. Like you said, President Trump is talking about countries holding it. If President Trump wins and we have the 200,000 plus Bitcoin, if we still have that many by the time, it's unbelievable. These people, they get Trump derangement syndrome. He says he's going to do a Bitcoin strategic stockpile. The next day they start moving coins. It's just unbelievable. I've never seen, it's definitely something mentally going on, but we have the ability here to focus on the asset side of our balance sheet, right? And we get the added benefit of the destruction. FTX is gone. Bitcoin price went to discounts to its cost of production. The entire ecosystem washed out. All the mismanagement, all of the bad actors, they've disappeared. Now there's more bad actors left over, and there's more new ones coming, because that's part of life. That's the human variable and the human element. But the essence is that we had that destructive part of the cycle. So once we leave that part of the cycle, people get confused. Like, how could Bitcoin go from sub 20 all the way back up to new all-time highs? Well, because it's building from a new, stronger foundation because of the destruction that took place. If FTX was still here today, what's the chances of going to a new all-time high? Not that good, because they're just going to keep selling paper Bitcoin. And then they're going to get bailed out again. But no, Bitcoin says, no, we're not going to let you do that. You're done. You're crushed. There's nothing you can do to save yourself here. And it puts limits on those people. And I'm hoping that Bitcoin, it acts like that Trojan horse. Like, it's like they bring in because it's going to enrich them. It's going to increase the asset side of our balance sheet. So now we can have even more liabilities. But at the same time, it's that Trojan horse that then all of a sudden, when they make a few bad decisions, there is no amount of money that they can print that's going to save them. And now fiat currency goes back and is tied to what it should be. First of all, it's a derivative of energy. And then secondarily, a derivative of economic energy. So now each country can independently perform based on its production and consumption, which of course becomes a huge concern for us here in the United States, since we do no production whatsoever and we consume with our credit cards. So, if we don't have it in our strategic reserve, we're really screwed, because the whole world is already moving in this direction. The mining hash wars are beginning. Putin signed the cryptocurrency mining. This thing is accelerating faster than I think even you and I, two of the most bullish people in the world on Bitcoin, could have ever anticipated. And here we are. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. I hope we get this Trojan horse moment where Bitcoin can come in and start to force healthy economics onto the system versus these fiat economics. And that transitions into our last topic, and I want to get your input on, what do you see the Fed doing in the near future? The Federal Reserve, Central Bank of the United States. Where do you see U.S. interest rates going? And then, based on what you see, what do you think the results are for the marketplace as a whole, and then for Bitcoin going into next year?
Oh, exciting. Okay, so first of all, I love the analogy of the Trojan horse. I've explored these concepts before. You bring the Trojan horse into your organization. You're thinking it's one thing, but then it's actually another thing. And you may be adopting Bitcoin as a company because you think you can make a quick profit, but then it actually purifies you. It actually makes you pure. And you don't even realize, and this is where people say, oh, we can't have BlackRock getting into Bitcoin. It's like, well, no, first of all, first principles, Bitcoin doesn't discriminate. If BlackRock wants to buy Bitcoin, we cannot set up a system where saying, no, only the retail investors can buy this, not the institutional investors. Like, well, straight away, you've made a discriminatory money, which is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin's neutral. Bitcoin's blind. And you can see also that countries have been operating in market failure for a long time, because, as you said, every time something happens, they just press print. That's market failure. We've been in market failure for years. And it actually transitions perfectly into your question about what the Fed's going to do, because we're now in a situation where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. So because we've been operating in market failure globally for so long, eventually the market has to fail. It has to fail. And I always, for the viewers out there, if you're not familiar with the term market failure, the easiest example I did was in my economics degree, where they spoke about, you make a hamburger as an example, and the hamburger costs $2 to make, but you sell it for $1. And you're saying, well, hang on, this is working because I'm getting lots of people into my shop. Now, sometimes it's a loss leader in business, where you sell a burger that costs you $2 to make for $1, but then you make a $3 profit on the soda or the pop that you sell. But in this example, there's only burgers. They're producing a $2 burger. Sorry, a $2 burger, but selling it for only $1. So there's a delta of 100% where the business will eventually go bust. And economies, global economies, are doing the same thing. They're producing or stealing all of this value from their people, and they can only do it for so long before the market collapses. That is market failure. It doesn't discriminate whether it's on the micro or the macro. We then go into the Federal Reserve,
Hold
an
on,
entity
let
that,
me ask you a question about what you said,
sure,
because you said collapse. And in my mind, a lot of listeners are thinking about this collapse as in prices going down. But correct me if I'm wrong, but when you say collapse, it's a result of them continuing to print. So it's actually it's a hyperinflationary collapse, right?
correct.
Okay.
What collapses is the purchasing power of that money. That's the collapse. And that's where you have hyperinflation, where it just goes, you've seen it in many countries, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, where they're carrying wheelbarrows full of cash. And I always think of the analogy that Andrea said, where this guy's pushing this huge wheelbarrow full of cash. And because the purchasing power has collapsed because they just printed too much of it. And someone says, hey, aren't you worried someone's going to steal all that cash? And he's like, no, I'm worried someone's going to steal the wheelbarrow. And it just showed you the wheelbarrow had more value than the piles and piles of cash within it. So in the micro example, it's the business that collapses. In the macro example, it's the economy that collapses. And the reason why it collapses is because the purchasing power falls through the floor, which then links into the Federal Reserve. So an entity which is neither a federal organization nor has any reserves of anything. I'm sure you've read The Creature from Jekyll Island, and everyone out there, you must read The Creature from Jekyll Island. I also suggest you must read Confessions of an Economic Hitman and The Bitcoin Standard. Those are the 3 books that help you really understand the complete scam that we're all part of. The Creature from Jekyll Island, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and The Bitcoin Standard. Those are 3 foundational books that will give everyone a very sound understanding of this is why Bitcoin will succeed and fiat will absolutely fail. So now that we have an understanding of where we are as an economy, that is, I argue that we've been in stagflation for some time now, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to play with the interest rates. They're lying about the CPI, and my country does the same. We lie about how much inflation actually is. They're arguing it's 4 to 4.2%. The reality is it's more like 15%, and I can prove it. Look at your food, look at your fuel, look at your energy. All the little things that you need to live. But they don't seem to account for any of the real cost of inflation. But people understand it. People can feel what's happening around them, and this is where Bitcoin comes into it. You now have to move into Bitcoin, not so that you can buy low, sell high, but because it's almost a necessity. If we look at what Venezuela was doing at one stage, they were taking their money and protecting their money from inflation by buying white goods, fridges, washing machines, dryers. They would take their money, quickly run to the store, buy a washing machine or a dryer, and wrap it in plastic and store it, because it was a way of protecting their money from inflation. They couldn't get the US dollar. They couldn't get gold. They couldn't get Bitcoin. Food was perishable. So it's like, well, where do we store our money? And white goods was one of the things. So society starts to realize, hang on, if I don't put my money somewhere, it's going to erode into an oblivion. But then the Federal Reserve, they're now into situations like, well, hang on, do we raise or lower or leave interest rates? Now, the government itself is addicted to free money, so they need more money. If they raise the interest rates too high, there's going to be too many defaults and no economic growth within society, within the economy. But if they lower it, then of course, then we go back to inflation where, hey, it's good for us in the investment space and we're going to see Bitcoin go through the moon. So we're now in the situation where they're damned if they do or damned if they don't. But this is a consequence of fiat. This isn't unique to the United States. It's a reality of a fake money. All fake money that operates in market failure always fails. The real question is when. When's it going to fail? Can they keep playing this game with the interest rates? Can they keep making money printer go burr? Can they keep stealing resources from other countries by going into wars that should never have happened in the first place? I don't know. When is the tipping point, and what's the Federal Reserve going to do? I'm looking forward to it. I hope Trump gets in. And I know Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. It's incredible. Trump derangement syndrome is so powerful that it leads to kids climbing up on roofs trying to kill him. That's how powerful this syndrome is. It's so deeply intertwined. And I ask everyone, like, why do you hate Trump so much? And it's like, oh, because he's this and that. And I just say, well, but how do you know that? And when you actually follow it, you actually follow it back. It's like, well, that's what the media told me. And people think that they know, but when they really question how they know, it's because what they watched in the media. And then you say, well, who owns the media? And then you follow the money and you start to realize that the antithesis to the financial mess that we have at the moment is now the biggest enemy of the deep state, because the deep state is addicted, whoever they are. And again, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and this will help you form this picture. The deep state, whether it's governments or banks or a group of really powerful, rich people in a room, I don't know. They're so addicted to free money that if anyone comes in to compromise that, they will throw everything in their power to make sure that they don't lose their grip on money. Whether it's, hey, he colluded with Russia, or he did something naughty with a porn star, or if that doesn't work, we'll try and put a bullet through his head. And these are all things that they're throwing at the antithesis to the financial broken system that we have at the moment. What will happen, I think, over the next few years is, I'm really waiting till November. I think, unfortunately, CJ, no matter what happens in the elections in November, there's going to be civil unrest in America. No matter who wins, if the left wins, you're going to see streets burning. If the right wins, you're going to see streets burning. I think we're at this path in society where we're so self-absorbed with our own rights and our own feelings and our own entitlement that if anything in the bigger picture happens, it's almost like we're entitled to now go on the street and protest and burn buildings and carry on. This just isn't something that our grandparents did in the olden days after a presidential election. They're like, oh, well, congratulations, left. You got it this time. And next cycle, it's like, oh, well, congratulations, right. You got it this time. And I mentioned the political election because, of course, they say that the Fed and the government are delinked. Now, in Australia, we have the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, so it's the same thing, but it's just a different name. And what I observe is whenever, inflation goes too high or the interest rates are too much, we look at the government and say, hey, government, what have you done? And the government says, well, it wasn't us. It was them. It was the Federal Reserve. They did it. We don't print the money. They print the money. And the Federal Reserve goes, well, hey, it wasn't us. We didn't do it. They issued treasury bonds and we just paid them out and we're doing what we're told. So it wasn't us. So it's this perfect scam. And the creature from Jekyll Island will explain this better than I can, is that you have this separation of these two powers who reap the rewards of this corrupt system, but neither of them are held to account. Because, hey, I didn't print the money and, hey, I'm not the government. So they can work hand in hand. And then, of course, you throw in banks in that. And it's this financial love triangle of corruption where they benefit the most and everyone else suffers, but no one is held to account. And it links actually back to the Trojan horse of Bitcoin. Once Bitcoin gets into these systems, it actually purifies them, whether they like it or not.
I laughed when you were talking about if the left wins, the streets burn. If the right wins, the streets burn. But I'm laughing because there's what else can I do? But being a U.S. citizen, this is actually my largest concern, and I think this is the most ignored macro reality in the entire world right now, because very few people have I heard speak the truth that you just said, which is a lot of people, and you're from Australia, which is that's how you go, guys. For those of you who are listening, Adam is so in tune. I would give him a military level grade of understanding for those listeners out there. So if you listen to him like, oh, this guy was an economist, he went to school, he sounds smart. It's a little bit more than that. Okay. Adam strategizes these things to a level that we wouldn't do or would think to do. And it comes at a military level again. And what you need to understand is that the MAGA people, they already dealt with a stolen election, right? Everybody, they feel the 2020 election was stolen. And even in Georgia, they came out and said that there were over 300,000 votes that were cast that were ineligible. The people were either dead, not eligible to vote. Well, Biden won by 12,000 votes in Georgia. So out of those 300,000 votes, it's very safe to say that even if you just split them 50-50 or 60-40, there was a significant amount more than 12,000, which was actually the catalyst, which that was actually the breaking point to winning the state. And that also happened in Arizona as well. So a lot of people who are in the MAGA camp, it's going to be hard for them to take a loss because they feel like they already had it stolen. So this is not like, let's just take the L. Like, no, we had it stolen before, and now you're going to steal it again. And my position is, if they've already stole it once and they got away with it, why wouldn't they steal it again? Right? If they already printed QE1, why wouldn't they do QE2 and QE3 and QE4?
Absolutely.
Why not? They're just going to steal it again. So I see that's a big problem. And then they call us conservatives for a reason, because we're conservative. Our reactions are conservative. Our policies are conservative. And that's not to say that I believe in the red, blue, left, right paradigm. My listeners know and understand that. But everybody else does. And that's what we're dealing with right now. And on the left side, if they lose, well, look what they did after they won. They won and they put American patriots in jail for a peaceful protest, and they branded it as a revolution. Let me tell you something. If real patriots went to the Capitol for a revolution, it wouldn't have been over in one day, and there would have been a lot more shots fired. All right, that's just mainstream media propaganda, and they won. So what the hell are they going to say? Because after the election, Trump wouldn't get sworn in until January. The election is in November. So you have a lot of time that they still have the power of the law. And in Trump's case scenario, Mike Pence kind of stabbed him in the back and did not force any type of recount or investigation at all. He just certified the votes, and that was the end of it. And the power of the law transitioned. Well, Kamala is the VP right now, so I'm not sure if she actually gets to make that vote or not, since she's the candidate. But maybe she's not the candidate and she does get to make that vote, or maybe somebody who's in their party also gets to make that finalized vote, like Mike Pence did. And my point is I don't see them giving up the power of the law. And on my Twitter feed, everybody can check out, there was this guy, Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, who came out recently and said, the Supreme Court is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is Trump is an ineligible candidate according to the 14th Amendment. So they want to disqualify Trump. And he said, on January 25th, on the inauguration day, sometime before that, it's going to be our job in Congress to, if Trump wins, to disqualify him, to get military protection for the Democrats who have the power of the law, and to investigate and confirm the results of the election, since they're the sitting party. And then that there could be civil war conditions. Those were the three things he said. So these people, they have sometimes they tell you what they do and they do the opposite because they're very strong hypocrites. But a lot of times they tell you the truth too. And this guy's just coming out telling us what's going to happen, that if they lose, there's going to be civil war conditions. And if MAGA loses, then I don't think they're going to put up with another stolen election. So I say all that to say this, bringing it back to finance and Bitcoin and economics. Who the hell is talking about that risk for U.S. treasuries? Because that is a significant risk. People outside the United States you might be like, I'm in the U.S. fish tank, so I don't know what goes on in Australia and what it's really like to live there. I don't know how bad it is in the UK and in France and in Europe. I don't know because I don't live there. I've visited and it's beautiful, but I see the good side of everything. I don't live in that fish tank. If you don't live in the fish tank here in the United States, you don't know how bad it is. Adam is spot on with the level of families are breaking apart. And the last time that this happened was the Civil War. Brothers and cousins were fighting each other in the Civil War. But you know what happened financially in the Civil War? The South could not bank with their enemies from the North. They had to issue their own Confederate fiat debt note. So if that were the case, if we're coming to a time of civil unrest, and we're coming to a time between the right doesn't want to give up the power of the law, the left doesn't want to give up the power of the law, well, then how does this work? Who has control of the Treasury? Who can roll over the debt? What happens if there is some type of divide where maybe the MAGA people come out and say, hey, those crazy Democrats spent all that money, not us, right? And the Democrats will say, no, they spent all that money, not us. We're not going to pay that. And then you have two separate entities with two new debt issuances based off of two new economies and tax bases. What does that mean for existing US Treasury holders? I just think there's a lot of risk in US Treasuries right now, including the Civil War risk and the fallout of a union that can have a type of GDP. Like our GDP, or debt to GDP, is already over 100%. It's like close to 120 something. If you break up Texas and California and Florida and New York, like you're gonna have debt to GDP of like 500 and 600%, hyperinflationary zones. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you see that civil unrest? Do you think that civil unrest is priced in U.S. Treasuries right now? And then if it's not, when the Fed lowers rates, because they will be forced to lower rates, when they lower rates, is that going to matter? Will the rest of the yield curve even care because of all this civil unrest, right? The Fed can state the front end of the curve, the overnight rate down. The rest of the curve is a free market curve. The bond end of the curve can sell off. You can see 30-year notes go to 10% or more. And they can lose control. Now they'll have to do yield curve control or attempt to do yield curve control. But maybe there's nobody in charge to even try to do yield curve control. Am I bambling on here, or do you think there is something more to this approaching civil unrest that could actually lead to financial instability?
I see your civil unrest and I raise it to global war. So I'm right with you with this, and the market agrees. So at the moment, the US debt rating is about the 13th in the world. So in the past, you were the number one. If you were getting treasuries or money or anything to do with America, you were number one. You were the least risky. Now you've dropped all the way down to number 13, the United States of America, number 13. That's 12 other nations around the world that are financially more trusted than the States. Now, this is coming. I don't know his name, but he speaks a lot in Congress, and he's very passionate about this. He's got a family. I'll find him and I'll send a link. And he talks about, he's like screaming at the American people as a politician. He's saying, you need to wake up. This is what's happening. Our debt is out of control. We are not as financially attractive to the rest of the world as we used to be. The market is waking up. Other nations are moving to take our dominance. And we are so arrogant as the United States, saying, well, we're America. We can print the money. We're the global reserve currency. You can even see that in the past, Fed chairs saying, we don't need to worry because we can just print money. And every economy that's used a fiat as a global reserve currency has always failed with that arrogance, with the arrogance of, we'll just print our way out of it. We'll just print our way out of it. Where I see the civil unrest, I actually strategize, and I thank you very much for your kind words. And I did actually 20 years in the military as well. What I actually see that is going to happen is when Trump was nearly shot the other day, people were saying we were an inch away from a civil war in America. I took it a step further. I said, no. We were an inch away from global war. And the reason why is because it's the old, divide and conquer. There's been so much division within the West, male versus female, black versus white, immigrants versus non-immigrants, traditional landowners versus non-traditional landowners, this gender versus the countless other genders that they make, this sexuality versus this, and it's all division for all of us. And, united we stand, divided we fall. But where it goes to the next level, my thought experiment of mapping this out strategically, this is what would have happened. If Trump had taken that bullet in the head and died, there would have been immediate riots. Like the right would have absolutely risen in pain, in anger, in betrayal, and the streets would have burned. But then you have to ask, CJ, what would the enemies outside of the States done? What would the Russias and the Chinas and the alliance out there say? Is this our opportunity? Is this when you do it? Is this when you move? Because the temperature in the world, and I'm not talking about the environment, I'm talking about the military temperature, the political unrest, it's starting to rise and rise and rise. And it's not unique to where we are at the moment. We see it over and over. You had the Greek Empire, the Dutch Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, the British Empire, the US Empire, and anyone who's arrogant enough to think to say, well, now this is the empire for the rest of the world. It's now the US empire until the end of humanity. It's like, well, that may be true if there's a nuclear holocaust, but if there's not, there's going to be a transition in the empire. Now, whether it's China or Russia or India, they've got the numbers, I don't know, or whether it's a combination of all of them, I don't know. But what I do know is that things are always changing. Change is a law of the universe. It is a law of reality. And markets in market failure always fail. So we've got this perfect storm at the moment where you have massive division within societies throughout the West. We're no different in Australia. There's so much friction in what we have within ourselves. You have massive division in what we think the world should be run as a global community. Some people have these values, some people have those values. But then you have this corrupt glue, if you will, that holds it all together. And that corrupt glue is the US dollar. And it's no dig at the US dollar. If the Australian fiat dollar was the global reserve currency, it would be the same cancerous, toxic glue that will eventually fall to pieces. So my big fear, my friend, is in fact, I was never a prepper, but I do prepare a lot now. So I have a lot of supplies in case things go down. I recently bought a new car now. Normally I like nice European BMWs, but this time I actually bought a Toyota SUV. And the reason why I bought that is because if something goes down, what's the most reliable car in the world? Well, it's got to be a Toyota, and I've got to get an SUV, and I've got to get good fuel efficiency. And so my paradigm is now changing just in how I prepare. Now, if nothing happens and I've got a nice new Toyota that's super reliable and doesn't use much fuel, fantastic. But if I need that car and I haven't prepared, I'm in a world of hurt. It comes with the basic supplies. My fear is in November, whoever wins, the streets are going to burn. My part two or bigger fear is that's when the enemy, whoever they are, that's when they go, now, go, move. You go in there because if you've got a divided United States instead of a united United States, how on earth are you going to bring the people together to, first of all, produce a war machine? I mean, around the West, you can see that recruiting numbers for militaries, they've fallen through the floor. We cannot recruit, we cannot retain. We cannot get these people to join the military and die for their flag because we keep burning that, for their family because we've broken down the family, for their God because that's an offensive word now, for their nation, for anything. All of these things that we used to fight for as a civilization, they've all now been broken down at their core. And yeah, and it rots us. And this is where governments lose because it's like, right, we're going to recruit all these guys to fight. They're like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go to a fight. And then you start conscripting people to fight. Well, on the battlefield, a huge part of warfighting is morale. Because if you're disenfranchised and you don't have the morale to go over the trenches and run into a hail of bullets, but the opposition does, irrespective of weapons and money, the will to fight is so important on the battlefield. Now, at the moment, there seems to be a will to fight ourselves, within ourselves, but there isn't a will to fight for the government on overseas shores, per se. If the election comes out peacefully and people say, like just do the thought experiment, the left wins and the right goes, well done, left, congratulations, we'll get you next time. Or the right wins and says, and the left goes, well done, right, we'll get you next time. I just cannot see that happening. I cannot see that happening. What I can see happening is mass riots. And then we have to ask ourselves, CJ, well, when does it stop? Do we do this every election? It is the norm now that every election, streets burn and capitals are stormed. I don't know. And if it is the norm now, well, how long will the enemy sit by and go, yeah, we'll let them sort it out, as opposed to let's go now, strike?
Mm. Yeah, it's so, it's so frustrating too, because a lot of people say, blockchain was only for Bitcoin, and it's true. It is the best use case for that distributed, decentralized ledger, no doubt. But isn't it obvious that, like, wouldn't it be nice to be able to register to vote and then have vote go through blockchain so that everybody can just,
Absolutely.
on voting night, you're not watching the news, you're on the Block Explorer and you're seeing how things
Absolutely.
are going. I mean, this is just common sense, but it shows you the level of corruption, because it's those puppeteers, those cantillionaires who are financing both sides of it. And you're right. That strategy is to divide and conquer, and they are doing it. And if they could take out, I truly believe this. No offense to Australia or any other country, but the reason that the United States is under attack is because this is the last hope of the world. There is no, I mean, in Australia, I'm surprised you didn't get arrested. Well, you're smart enough. You're smart enough, but a lot of people probably got tickets and fines and even arrested because they weren't smart about it. You have that military training, but In the UK, they're arresting people for retweeting information. Like, imagine it. You didn't even say it. You just retweeted it. And the cops are showing up at your door
Terrifying.
and arrested. And
Absolutely
then
terrifying.
meanwhile, there's mobs of people in the street who are creating property destruction and beating innocent people up, and there's no cop to be seen. So, this is what's coming to America, and this is their plan for America. And America is under attack right now because I think, the final stand happens here. And we're seeing that now with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Did you get a chance to tune into their spaces?
Absolutely, I did. Yes, I did.
That was I heard a couple people say this now, but I said it last night, and I'll say it again, and I want to get your take on it. FDR, he did the fireside chats back in 1933. A lot of people don't know this story, and the only reason I do is because it's actually a banking history story. in March 6th, 1933, the banks absolutely collapsed. I mean, like, collapsed, and people were in panic because they were losing everything. And FDR actually shut down the entire banking system from like the federal government level, just shut it down. And then 6 days later, on March 12th, 1933, he started this thing called the fireside chat, which was on the radio. And he was able to connect directly with his constituency and with even people who were not of his party or supporters of his, but communicate with the public on a whole level basis. And my tweet was like, 1933, FDR starts the fireside chats, and 2024, Trump potentially starting the fireside spaces, seeing this evolution of community, right? There were over 70 million impressions from that space. And when I was in it, there was over 1.2 or 1.3 million people all listening at the same time from all over the world. Community again, right? Going back to that original community, and tapping in directly to the community, not through a mainstream news article or a headline or a narrative, but through regular conversation like you and me are having right now. So I wonder, what do you think about Trump trying to utilize a fireside spaces strategy to break through the mainstream media propaganda, to break through the lies, to show who he is? Because I felt like I went to dinner last night. I'm like, man, we went to Ruth Chris. I got a filet. I had a sweet potato. I had a few Captain Cokes. And, I had dinner with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And people are like, what? What? I'm like, that's what it feels like, because you were right there in a conversation, two multi-billionaires, two really successful people, two people who care about humanity and America. And they might have different visions for that, but they still recognize it enough to come together to do what's best for the United States of America and for the Constitution to reign supreme. So what do you think? Is there a future in fireside spaces? And does this give us an opportunity to fight through the propaganda that's designed to divide us and allow people from all over the world to start to come together? Maybe that's why they're attacking Elon so much.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it does. And you can see we go back a step further. So first of all, I was I was there as well. That is, I was tuning in with I think it's at 1.1 or 1.2 million, and I was having lunch. So you were having dinner, I was having lunch, and I was listening to it, and I can very much relate to what you were saying. I actually go back a few years when Trump was in and coming into his presidency. Do you recall? And it seems so foreign now, but I can recall clearly that when he started using Twitter at the time, and he started tweeting directly to the people, the media and other politicians lost their mind. They're like, hang on a second, you can't use Twitter. You have to speak to someone with a camera and a microphone, and you have to go through these centralized body. And we talk about centralized and decentralization. Like, you have centralized media bodies. And the big hoo-ha, if you will, was, how dare this man, this free American, how dare he speak directly to the people? And I'm sitting on the sideline thinking, well, why wouldn't he do that? Why wouldn't you speak directly to the people? Why do I have to go through a third-party, filtered, centralized, corrupt body called the media when I have the technology and the freedom and the communication skills to speak directly to the people? Now, of course, they hated that because the media was like, oh my God, first of all, we're out of a job. Second of all, we can't apply our filters to what he's saying. We can't put our spin on it. And third of all, the big turning point was other politicians, they started doing it as the norm now. So my prime minister has an X account. Your president has an X account. Everyone has an X account. So he created a new way of doing communications with the people. And at the time, it was so revolutionary that people were destroying him. Well, now I don't think there's a single leader on the planet that doesn't have an X account, even if they hate Elon Musk. So it's already there. I think the big turning point yesterday was with that fireside chat, if you will, of that Spaces, was that you had two powerhouses speaking with each other. You had Elon Musk, who has, and it's all projection on the radical left. And let's be clear, we're talking about the radical left. I think in society you need a heart and a brain, a left and a right. I think it's okay. It's when anything goes too extreme, when it's too far left or too far right. And I think most reasonable human beings agree with that. If we go too far either way, it's a bit too much. What's happened is when Musk bought Twitter and then changed it to X, wasn't it ironic that the radical left was saying this is going to shut down free speech? This is going to shut down the ability to communicate, when the reality is it was the complete opposite. It was the opportunity for everyone to be heard. Now, of course, they had to say it was shutting down free speech, because what it was actually going to do was enable the right to speak. Because in the past, anyone who was on the right, and even if you were centered right, they all labeled you the same. It was all radical right or extreme right wingers. But even if you were centered right, you were shut down on Twitter, because it was a very leftist platform that said, unless you're saying there's 400 genders and Orange Man bad, you can't speak on this platform. And money came in as a powerful tool, a fair tool, to say, you know what, I'm going to buy this platform and I'm going to open it up to everyone. And that made the radical left lose their mind. It's like, oh my God, we've now just lost the ability to put a gag on everyone who doesn't think like us and everyone who doesn't speak like us. So they had to throw everything at it to stop it. What we then saw is, of course, Trump made his own platform, which hasn't got the network effect, but it's still a free market, so he can actually use it if he wants to. But the turning point yesterday were these two powerhouses coming together and speaking. Now, you saw that there was a massive DDoS attack where whoever it was like, quick, shut it down, shut it down. And you mentioned what's happening in UK. Everything they now is labeled is disinformation. It's not disinformation they're trying to shut down. It's just information. They don't want any information out. They'll label it disinformation and misinformation to justify what they're doing. But the reality is it's just information. We can see this throughout history. You know, when the printing press was created, they wanted to shut down the printing press because it enabled people to print stuff and get information out to the masses. Even reading, if you go back in history, reading was really only for scholars and priests. And they didn't want the masses being able to read, because then they could actually transfer information combined with the printing press. And we see it over and over again. Newspapers that are held by centralized bodies that they want to inform the narrative. Well, now, the power of the rules of the universe and nature and evolution is that we all now have a voice. We have a voice through this microphone, through this screen, through this internet connection. And governments are scurrying to say, well, hang on a second. Although we claim that we believe in freedom of speech, we actually don't believe in freedom of speech, because if you retweet a piece of information, even if the information is factual, as an example, if there's people walking on the streets and you don't do any commentary whatsoever, I'm going into UK now. So you've got people running through the streets with buildings burning. You film that and you post it, and you don't put any label on it, any commentary, any opinion. You just take the truth from the camera and you tweet it. You can end up in jail. You can end up in jail. And
You
that
know,
is just, and the other law that they're putting in, I think it was he was interviewing Tate, and he said anyone who gives out misinformation should be put in jail. And I thought, well, isn't that ironic? If you really want to adopt that law, then pretty much every media outlet, every news presenter, every reporter belongs in a prison cell, because every single one of them are guilty of misinformation, all of them. But of course, the hypocrisy, my friend, is that, like, well, you know, we, the centralized body sponsored by whoever's the deep state, whoever it is, we can give out misinformation because we are different. But if you actually put out the real information, we're going to put you in a prison cell. And that is the hypocrisy. That is why people are rising and saying, hang on a second. Why is it that this group of people can talk, but this people can't? Why is it that you, as a centralized media, you can make blatant lies to the people? Like, I don't know, Trump colluded with Russia. You know, my government sponsored a 4-part series on the ABC network. to publish a blatant lie against our allied leader. And my taxes had to fund that. Now, of course, there's no consequence for those lies. Or what about the lies of the vax is 100% completely safe, there's nothing to worry about? People are dying, people are stroking out, people are getting cancer. Oh, well, we won't hold them to account. This is people dying. But yet, if I republish or just publish an image of something on the street, I go to jail. This is why civil unrest in the West, which just rhymed, is now bobbling to the top. And you're going to see a tipping point. Something is going to boil over. The question is, when is it going to happen, and how far will it go?
You know, when they do that, what's it called? What's it I'm looking for? Damn, I'm gonna have to edit this app because I just brain farted on that. That's the problem. That's the problem when you talk, Adam. So many ideas run through my head. There was probably like 7 or 8 points. I
feel the same with you, man.
Forget about the first couple points; those are gone. Maybe I can catch the last. Because you're always so on point. It's unbelievable. My goodness. Okay, well, you know, I'm probably not going to edit that out because it makes it. You know what, Adam? I've appreciate you joining me, and I love your viewpoint. And before I let you go, we started off with your first orange pill, which is Bitcoin must be the layer one of everything, which I couldn't agree with more. And now I want to end it more on a Bitcoin note, kind of get out of this, shake this politics off of us, and get into what has been your most recent orange pill for Bitcoin, and what are you most excited about going into next year?
What I'm most excited about is so many newbies are coming into the space, so many retail investors, they want to be in here. And it's not me saying, hey, like, let's face it, when you first get into crypto and you have the orange pill moment, you're like, you've seen the light and you run around and you tell everyone, it's like, oh, there's this Bitcoin thing, it's amazing, and this and that. And I've realized that you can't do it that way. You have to actually sit back and let the people come to you. And what's so exciting to me at the moment is so many people are legitimately coming to me, not for, hey, take my money, make me rich, but legitimately, can you explain to me how this Bitcoin thing works? And they're legitimately coming around, not because they want to buy low and sell high, but because they understand money is broken. And this is the exciting part for me. Not that money is broken, but that people are waking up. They understand what the word fiat means. They know it's not just a car company. They know it's actually a fake, corrupt money. And they know that there's in fact a solution. And they're not looking for gold, as in physical gold. They're looking at digital gold. So what I'm so excited about is that my channel's growing. And it's not about, yeah, I'm getting more hits and more subs. No. It's about people are waking up and they want to move to a safe, sound, open, neutral money. And that is Bitcoin.
That's beautiful. Well, Adam, you gave me an hour and 40 minutes of your precious time. I'm very thankful for it. And I'm going to have you back on again soon because we could have kept going for another hour. I know you and I know the way you think, but I think as we get closer to the election, maybe a little bit after the election, if I can even broadcast, Lord willing, I'm able to broadcast at that moment, we can hop in and kind of pick up where we left off because I think people are going to need to hear our action plans, right? It goes beyond just Bitcoin, right? We can be Bitcoin billionaires and still be screwed if things don't go as
Correct.
planned.
Yep.
So we need community. You need water. You need shelter. You got to live off of Twitter, right? You need to shake real hands, look real people in the eye, make connections, build your network. Do that now because God forbid if something goes a way that we don't expect it or don't want it to go, Bitcoin's going to play its role, but it's not going to save you. So make sure you're teaching your family, your friends that, yes, you save your purchasing power in Bitcoin, but you save your family with self-defense, with agriculture, with water, with friends, with community. And Adam, nobody demonstrates that better to you. Thank you so much. And any last words for the audience you'd like to share?
Powerful words. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with you. Anyone wants to follow me, join me on YouTube. Look at my book, 28 Pro Trader Tips, The Art of Trading, or do anything crypto safely on www.thecrypto.land. CJ, it's an honor to work with you.
Thank you, Adam. Follow him, buy his book, get prepared, everybody.